I am here with the genius of a thinker, someone whose interests have led us to understand better the new world in which we live, who can make sense out of the industry in which we find ourselves as he knows the history behind it. And he speaks from that understanding few have, not only because he has probed so deeply, but because he has always been a part of it. He speaks now of mindfulness, that which we must cultivate in the sea of information we negotiate daily. Directed attention is the way the mind changes the brain. And for all of our gains in information, we must be able to process it, and even more importantly, think about what we are learning. So, if you want to engage, you have to give it your full attention. And if it's not getting in there, maybe you aren't really listening. Do not make that mistake today. Turn off your phones because here is Howard Rheingold. Welcome, Howard.
My pleasure.
All right. I was reading something by Jonathan Salem Baskin, who wrote Branding Only Works on Cattle, a great title for a book. And he recently remarked that in the past, the test of successful communications wasn't if a presenter could earn someone's attention, but rather was someone capable of grasping what he or she was being told. So I'd like to ask you, does having active attention mean the listener has a responsible role as well as the speaker? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, of course, the responsibility to the speaker is not to disrupt proceedings for everybody else, but beyond that, that's maybe a philosophical question, but it's up to the listener or the student to try to grasp what's going on. It is, of course, the responsibility of the teacher or the presenter to be able to communicate effectively. So it sounds like a two-way street or a partnership to me. I think there's a biblical quotation about he who has ears shall hear. So I'm always aware that there are people in the classroom or in the audience who are totally with me, and there are people who are struggling to keep up. And isn't that life?
Yep. Yes, it is a partnership. You've also said that the difference between disseminating information and education is to teach one to think for oneself. But you've also described some inherent problems with that. What might they be?
Well, any parent or teacher who has a classroom of 20 or 30 students or more knows that it's a lot of work to encourage people to question you. I think it's really important as a teacher to encourage my students to actively inquire, including interrupting me as the teacher and asking questions of me. But that's difficult for some people. And as a parent, you've got to, your kid's saying, but why do I have to do that? Eventually you lose patience and say, we've got to get out of the house in 1 minute because I'm your dad, let's go. So, and there is something of a religious or an ideological question here. There are people who believe that Father is the authority, the Holy Book is the authority. You don't think for yourself. So I'm aware that this is the philosophy of the liberal arts. It's not something that everybody subscribes to, but I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to steer your way in the world based on received wisdom. The world is changing so rapidly, particularly the online world, the media world, that you need to be able to exercise your own critical faculties and not look to authority at every moment to determine whether what you're being told is true, or whether you're being sold a bill of goods, or whether the website you are surfing to is accurate, inaccurate, or totally bogus. Increasingly, because opening up the ability to publish and broadcast to everybody destabilizes authority. You can no longer trust sources the way you could in the olden days, when you could trust what someone on the television said, or you could trust what you read in a book or the newspaper. Now, what you see on the web, what you hear on the web, who knows? It's up to you.
In that, it's actually scarier. It's more important to think for yourself, but it becomes almost scarier. And I wonder if people will live up to that. Accuracy is now up to the individual. And there appears to be then a new mountain to climb, not only to process the information, but also discern its truthfulness. You said the most important critical uncertainty today is how many of us learn to use digital media and networks effectively, reasonably, credibly, collaboratively, civilly, and humanely. Do you want to say anything more on that? That's such a crucial issue.
Well, the online world is a very noisy place. There's a lot of bad information. There's a lot of uncivil communication.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that it's possible, even if one philosophically agreed, to police that on the input side. How are you possibly going to be able to police everything that people put on the internet, everything people say on the internet? I think it has to be up to the consumer of the information to try to determine its accuracy. But I also think the level of noise, the level of civility depends on the number of people who know how to use the media
Mm-hmm.
effectively. So I'm an optimist. I think that people can learn to do that. That's the way things were in the olden days on the internet. The old timers taught the newcomers a very long time ago, before the web. Actually, the influx of people onto the internet who didn't know the mores and the norms became so powerful that the old timers were overwhelmed. This was known in Usenet as the September that never ended. It's an actual historical event, because before the web, Usenet
Mm-hmm.
was the way a lot of people communicated, and it's an online freewheeling discussion. But there are certain rules, like read the list of frequently answered questions, so you don't bother people in that channel with questions all the time. Act civilly. What used to be called netiquette. And every September, college freshmen would get onto
Right.
the internet, and they would be taught the norms, maybe sometimes or often in an impolite manner. But when AOL put 3 million people onto the internet in one day without giving them any kind of instructions, then the old timers became overwhelmed, and it became known as the September that never ended. So the idea that the people who are already online are going to help newcomers learn their way around, that's really obsolete. I mean, it's maybe 10 years obsolete. So somewhere that education has to come from somewhere, and I think that it's really important for that to happen. It's not rocket science. It's not even the multiplication tables, but it's not something that's obvious. The internet does not teach you how to use it.
Yeah, and you've got to be prepared as an individual. The onus is also on you. If you want to come to play, you've got to come with some of the equipment already in place, I guess.
Yep.
Yep. Something I heard you speak about was that humans will not always create a desert in their wake. You pointed to a remarkable study on disproving the tragedy of the commons, the tendency for humans to only act in their own self-interest. You speak of leveraged self-interest and mentioned that there were 7 design principles that work for collective action. Do they work also for a virtual community? And if so, could you describe that a bit?
Well, I think they do. These 7 design principles. These are not rules. Human sociality is not deterministic. It's a chaotic system. It's a complex emergent system in which you can't really say that there are hard and fast rules that are always going to work. But the person who discovered that the tragedy of the commons isn't always the case, that quite often groups of people are able to create sets of norms that enable them to use a common resource without depleting it. That was Eleanor Ostrom, and she won the Nobel Prize for Economics this year, which surprised some people since she is a political scientist. But she has all kinds of empirical evidence to show that the tragedy of the commons is a tragedy because Garrett Hardin claimed it was inevitable, that humans acting in their own self-interest are going to deplete common resources. They're going to fail to provision them, and certainly we're seeing that fisheries are overfished, forests are clear cut, and deserts grow where forests used to be. Humans do destroy the commons in many instances, and I think that the whole climate change, global warming issue is a commons issue, individual behavior versus collective behavior. None of us want to see vast climate changes that disrupt civilization. On the other hand, individually, we all want to get in our automobiles and have the freedom to drive somewhere. That, in a nutshell, is the social dilemma, and people overcome those social dilemmas by developing sets of norms, and that's what Eleanor Ostrom talked about. I do have a lot of material about these kinds of cooperative norms and rules of thumb up on a site, cooperationcommons.com. If you want to look there, you can find a lot of summaries of Eleanor Ostrom's work. But of course, her work has been widely recognized, particularly since the Nobel. But,
sure.
But the tragedy of the commons is a trope that humans all know, and it's part of a larger narrative. Larger narrative is that without some kind of policing, you really can't trust groups of humans who don't know each other to act together in a way that's going to act in all of their interests. Of course, now we're seeing on the internet that there are ways that people can act in self-interest in a way that adds up to more for everybody. Isn't that what the web itself is? Isn't that what
or open source,
Wikipedia or open source are? So we know that there are exceptions, and the key, getting back to what we're talking about in regard to civility and crap detection online, I think that the key is education. How that education happens, that's a practical problem. I don't think it's happening or going to happen anytime soon in our educational institutions, but people teach each other things online all the time, and things spread very quickly. That's, things go viral. So I'd like to see an understanding of how people can cooperate and overcome social dilemmas go viral.
Absolutely. And I think that she was recognized at this time, maybe to call attention to the fact that this cooperation is indeed extremely important. And you say so right on that nothing is more local, really, than a virtual community, and the possibility of being able to open this up for collaboration here. One of the most important things about being able to educate in a virtual world, let's say such as Second Life, is this great draw of collaboration. What do you think about education in a virtual environment, and would you teach a class in Second Life?
Well, I did include Second Life in courses that I taught at Berkeley and Stanford. The problem there is simply one of time. That Stanford runs in a quarter system. It's 10 weeks. 1 week is the first class, another week is the last class. those are special. 1 week is a holiday, so you've only got 7 classes. They're 3 hours long, but you've only got 7 class meetings. With a semester, that's almost twice as much, but there's a learning curve with Second Life, and so I have to weigh how many new things
Right.
can I have the students learn. But you know, if that constraint wasn't there, I think there are all kinds of great advantages to teaching in Second Life. I think it's particularly advantageous, though, when you can take advantage of being in an immersive three-dimensional environment in which you have objects that can have behaviors. So if you're teaching architecture or molecular biology, you know, or archaeology, anything in which you can navigate through a model of what you're doing, you can manipulate three-dimensional objects, I think that's the particular affordance of Second Life and immersive 3D environments. Otherwise, you're simply replicating giving a lecture in a different kind of environment. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's the advantage of that is that people from all over the world can participate. They can communicate with each other while I'm lecturing. I can show slides and videos, and that's I
It
think
reduces cost.
it's a powerful tool in a teacher's toolkit, but there's nothing particularly innovative about it. I think what's innovative is using the three-dimensionality of the environment, and I think that we will see that develop as more architects and molecular biologists and others who have three-dimensional aspects to what they're teaching begin to learn how to do it.
And the teacher also becomes more comfortable within it. And again, teacher and student must be able to bring that tool to the table. And I understand about the time it takes to become initiated. Let me ask you that, and I'm very glad to hear that because I am a complete believer in the immersive education experience as well and what this can bring. I've seen it in action. People have arguably then become smarter because of computers, but what about being more kind and more thoughtful? Certainly tenets of civilization.
You know, I don't know that there are any tools or media in themselves that are going to induce people to become more kind or more thoughtful. Presumably that's what religions are supposed to do, but of course we've got a world full of religions, and we're seeing some problems with that. You know, certainly there are a great many believers for whom kindness is an important part of their practice. Yet, you know, there's an awful lot of sectarian violence as well. And you know what? Don't ask me. I don't know what the answer to that one. It's a tough one. You know, you need to teach your children. It really starts there.
Of course, great, and very true. Do you think that it's possible for us to be influenced without our consent in terms of politics and images? Do you think that we have to? Go ahead. Sorry.
If that wasn't the case, then a very large industry would be out of business, wouldn't it? I mean, isn't that what advertising and political political communications are all about? I think it's been pretty clear for quite a while that everything from public relations to advertising offers all kinds of great ways to use media to influence people, to persuade people, to mislead people, and to manipulate people. Nothing particularly new about that. Political philosopher Habermas was afraid of the co-optation of democracy by public relations when he wrote his book in the early 1960s. So we've seen this coming for quite a while, and I think that the tools for manipulating people are not only becoming more powerful, they're becoming democratized. You no longer have to be the state or a wealthy corporation to use them. It's just like surveillance. It's no longer Big Brother, it's your neighbor.
Yes, and there are some pretty shocking examples of that. Do you think that new media has enabled people to be more politically responsible or to be more distracted from the democratic process? Or is this an adolescent forum that is on its way to maturity? And can it get there?
Well, the whole history of the public sphere. I have a little teaching module on the public sphere, a little widget that's gotten, I don't know, somewhere 15 or 20,000 views so far. But the idea that the political philosophers and historians have is that democracy is not just about people voting for their leaders. It's about citizens being well enough informed and free enough to communicate and able enough to communicate that they can form public opinion, and public opinion influences policy. That is fundamental to democracy, and that was the fear about the public sphere, was that it would become manipulated and that people would think that they were forming public opinion, but that public opinion had actually been carefully calculated and induced by others. So this is nothing new. It's a struggle that's gone on for a long time. The growth of democratic, self-governing institutions has been informed by the press. The press has always been rowdy and noisy and manipulated. There's nothing new about that. I think it's a constant tension. I think nowadays, of course, we have so many media that's a good thing and a bad thing. Instead of there being just 3 networks, there are a jillion networks. People have a lot of choices. The fear is that people are going to take out of those choices those that they agree with and listen only to the people who agree with their own beliefs and prejudices. And I think that's a legitimate fear. I don't think that this question's settled yet.
I agree. Yes, of course. And we will see quite a bit over the next 10 years on this. In Thought Tools, I loved what you wrote about Ted Nelson's contribution originally, way back, creating documents wherever owner is paid a whiff of royalty whenever somebody calls that document from memory. Do you think that's also in part why social media has taken off, that everybody now has that whiff of ownership and also royalty as well as immortality?
Well, I'm not seeing Ted's original vision of everybody getting some actual financial compensation for what they're doing, but clearly there are other rewards besides financial compensation. Attention, I think, is very important, and I think that people do things for the public good. So some kind of combination of maybe this is marketing for my other services, or maybe I just like to get some attention from other people, and I think this is a good thing to do, so I'm going to do it and contribute to others. Clearly, we're seeing that kind of combination can create a great deal of value online. I think it would be nice sometime in the future if there was an actual financial economy, but sometimes money kills things. Google used to have a service in which people could ask questions and others would answer it for money, and they went out of business. But Yahoo Answers has, I think, hundreds of millions of users, and people just do it for glory among their peers there.
Sure. I understand you're writing a book about digital literacy. That's going to be extremely important. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Howard, please?
Well, I think throughout the several decades I've been writing about PCs and about the internet, social communication online, mobile communication. The question has arisen, are these things any good for us? And I've become convinced that the answer is, well, that depends on who knows what about how to use the tools and the media that are available to us. That it's a question of literacy, just as it was in the years after the printing press was developed. Democracy and science did not automatically spring forth. People needed to learn how to do things together in new ways now that they were literate. And I think the same thing is true of the media that we have available to us. Certainly anybody can get online and do anything they want. That doesn't mean that they're going to be effective. And I think that there's kind of a myth of the digital natives that just because they were born with the internet and they've got their phone on them at all times, that they necessarily know how to use Second Life or a blog or a wiki to learn, to persuade, to organize. There are things that you need to learn how to do. So I am concentrating on writing a book that's very practical, something that you would want to give to your son and daughter before they got online, something that if you've been online for a while and you're kind of wondering about how to go deeper, that you would want to use. So the literacies I'm concentrating on are attention, participation, collaboration. You could call the next one search and credibility, or you could call it, as Hemingway did, crap detection, network awareness. And so those are the 5. So I think more than any book I've ever written, I am the primary source of this, certainly not the only one. So it's MIT Press. It's not due until about a year from now, and it probably won't be published until the spring of 2012. That's the plan.
Wow, you really are a hub person, and you think of that great wheel that we have of digital literacy. You're a central point, and we hope to get you back here after that book is published.
I hope to be back. Thanks for a very intelligent interview.
Thank you. I just have one more question, and that is about color. You are such a colorful person. Your paintings are just brimming with this. Do you have any early memory of seeing color and saying, wow, I got to get me some of that?
Well, my mother was an art teacher, and she was my art teacher. And her philosophy was that we're all artists and that creativity is a human need. But at some point, someone looks over your shoulder and says, that doesn't look like a horse. You should leave art to the specialists, and people get shut down. So her philosophy was not to teach skills, but to give permission. And so she gave me permission to color outside the lines. And that's where that comes from, I think.
I love that. Thank you so much, Howard. It's really been a thrill. And we do hope to see you again after your book is published. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.